and welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swail. Today, I welcome to the show Dr. Lloyd Potter. He is the current Texas State Demographer, a position he has held since his appointment by Governor Rick Perry in 2010. He is also a professor of demography at the University of Texas at San Antonio, where he serves as director of the Texas Demographic Center and co-director of the Institute for Demographic and Socioeconomic Research. Dr. Potter, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for inviting me to be on the show with you.
I'm excited to talk to you. I get to talk to people. I get to talk to representatives and senators and policymakers, all sorts of people. And I get to talk to the state demographer, which is actually kind of cool, I think. And I'm excited to talk to you. So I gave sort of a brief intro there. Is there anything that you want to expand on that?
I think it covers it pretty well. Hit the high points.
Sure, there's I'm sure there's some other high points and there's some mid points and all sorts of points in between, but
no low points though.
No low points, no, not at all. How does one become appointed to the state demographer position by Rick Perry?
First of all, the position has to be open. So
that's a start.
The previous state demographer had resigned, and I was at that time the state demographer was at the University of Texas at San Antonio, and I was also there. And actually, not too long before that, the previous state demographer resigned. I had joined UTSA, and I'm a demographer, and actually had studied under the first state demographer, Stephen Murdoch, a long time ago. So anyway, it was just kind of that the state needed a state demographer. I was qualified, and so the university and the University of Texas system put me forward as a potential nominee. The state demographer has to be nominated by the speaker and or the lieutenant governor nominated to the governor, and then the governor makes the appointment. So that's kind of pretty much how it happens. But the state demographer has to be a state employee. That's another piece of the legislation that created it. So that I'm a state employee working at a state university.
Yeah. So what exactly does a demographer do for those that don't quite understand?
Yeah, I get that. I mean, when people say, what do you do? And I say, I'm a demographer, people are usually kind of look at me like, and then I usually refer to population studies, and then people that makes sense. So what we do is I'm what would be referred to as an applied demographer. So I do some research, but I'm not doing. I don't have funded research from the National Institutes of Health, or currently don't have any funding from the National Science Foundation, and so on. And because a lot of that work is that kind of research is, you might call it like generative, or kind of like it's, whereas the work that we do is really very much focused on, what does the government need in terms of demographic data? And so we work with the legislature, with state agencies. So a lot of our work is with the Texas Department of Transportation, Texas Workforce Commission, Water Development Board. And so just a number of agencies that you can understand that they have a real need to understand both the current population as well as the forecast population, kind of what is the population going to look like in the future, so that we can anticipate and plan for, in the case of TxDOT, for infrastructure, highway infrastructure, and so on and so forth, for Water Development Board, water. And so I can go on about different agencies and their need to know about population dynamics and population size and change.
Yeah.
But then we also have, so a lot of businesses, a lot of nonprofit organizations are interested in what's happening. And so we get a lot of requests from just kind of a range, actually just people in the public have interest. And so we have on our website a place where people can submit data requests or requests for somebody to call them back and explain something to them. So we work closely mainly with state agencies. That's kind of where most of our time and effort is focused.
Yeah. So, Texas is obviously it's I think it's well known that it's one of the fastest growing states in the U.S. Over the past decade. You just mentioned that you guys study and think about the population growth into the future. What does that look like for Texas into the future? We know that we grew really fast. Are we plateauing? There's, stories about Austin specifically, that sort of boom that we were experiencing during COVID is maybe flattening out a little bit or maybe declining. Maybe some people that moved to Texas are starting to move out, but overall, what does it look like?
Well, yeah, I mean, so overall, I mean, Texas is continuing to grow. I mean, we do in our most recent set of projections, we're projecting that the growth will slow. We produce different scenarios. So in the one scenario that's really variable and difficult to predict is migration. So there are three basic components of population change. One is births and deaths. So kind of births minus deaths. So the net is the number of babies, or maybe in some cases there may be more deaths than births.
Yep.
And the second one is migration. And that's in migration minus out migration. And so that's the thing that's really, so deaths and births are pretty easy to forecast because you don't see dramatic changes. I mean, occasionally you'll have like we had the pandemic, that we had an uptick in deaths, but now the deaths have kind of come back down and stabilized again. Birth rates are just generally slowly declining across all race ethnic groups, and that's a significant. That's the thing that when I talked about the slowing of our growth is largely because we're anticipating that birth rates will continue to slow. We think they'll eventually level off, but in terms of they won't decline much further than once they hit a certain level. But it's migration that's the one that's really hard to predict because that's being driven largely by economic factors. So people essentially can, if you look where people are moving, that's telling you something about the economics of both the receiving area, so there's something attractive economically about it. When I was talking about economics, there's financial job opportunities and so on, but there's also quality of life as an economic factor as well. So people will potentially move to a place that they think is better than the place where they left. So that's the other thing is, where did they come from? And usually there are what we refer to as push factors there. So maybe it's the cost of living. Maybe it's loss of employment opportunities and things like that. That would be like, okay, we need to get out of here and find a place where we can find employment. And so those are, but that's really difficult to predict because you have factors that are influencing the places that are pushing, so that maybe things might change to make it more attractive for people to stay there. And then conceivably, things in Texas may potentially slow down economically as well. Historically, we've kind of had, and we have great policies in terms of economic development, and great, the governor's office has, great development office has been very aggressive and successful. And I think I would anticipate that will continue. But really, I think the thing that I was saying that we vary is the migration. So we might say, okay, here's what we think it will look like. Here's a high scenario, and here's a low scenario. And the births and deaths are again not the factor that's really driving any significant rapid change.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the population growth and the effect it has on infrastructure. You sort of touched on that a little bit with TxDOT trying to plan out, road building, the I-35 is being expanded through Austin, stuff like that. But before I get to the infrastructure part of this, you mentioned the birth rate sort of slowing down a little bit, and there's been alarms, people online, news articles, stuff like that. The alarm bells being rung about that issue popping up. And it's a bigger issue, certainly in countries like, I don't know, South Korea, Japan, places like that. What are the long-term effects of that slowing birth rate? If it doesn't hit replacement rate and let's say, migration also slows down, what happens in that scenario? Why are there alarm bells being rung?
Well, essentially the birth rate is something that influences our age structure.
Yeah.
So if we start having fewer and fewer births, then we start having fewer and fewer kids, and so which make obviously
Sure.
together, but
Yeah. We're not
but
all Benjamin
but
Buttons. Yeah.
but then, and we've seen this, and if you look at some of the, I know I'm based in San Antonio, and we kind of look at some at the San Antonio ISD. I mean, they've been having to close campuses or and consolidate schools, and we're seeing that happen across the state in more urbanized areas where this declining birth rates, we're beginning to see the impact of that. And actually, see it pretty much across the state. You're seeing it, especially in rural Texas as well.
Yeah.
And so there's that. So you start having this sort of contraction of the support system for young people, but then they age up into primary and secondary school. Post-secondary. So if you look at a lot of the universities in the Midwest and the Northeast, well, maybe there's probably some in the Northeast that continue to keep their enrollment up, but if you look at the Midwest, I mean, you see a lot of, actually all around the country, you see a lot of universities, their enrollment's starting to decline. Texas is, so far, we're doing okay with that, largely because we've had net inflow of migrants, and that's resulting in us being able to keep our enrollment in colleges and universities up. But eventually that probably will be really stretched. And if migration slows, it will potentially stretch it more quickly than what we've seen historically. So then, of course, that contracted cohort ages up into the labor force, and here we have a growing economy. So in a growing economy, you need a growing labor force. And so if we don't continue having net flow of migrants into the state, conceivably we'll see a contraction of the labor force, which will obviously have an economic impact, because if we don't have the workers that we need in the state, then the businesses aren't able to operate. And that's kind of a long way off, and I think, and I'm not even sure that it's going to happen, but that's when you look at the influence of declining birth rates, there's this long-term potential effect. And you mentioned, I think, South Korea, and if you kind of look at some other Northern European countries and so on, I mean, they're already struggling with this and really working, and have been for some time, and really work to try to promote pro-natalist policies to try to promote increased birth rates. But then a lot of them also are essentially having to export their labor. I shouldn't say their labor demand to places that have labor. So if you look at Japan's been very successful in terms of, I mean, San Antonio's got a big Toyota plant. Toyota actually has a big headquarters in Plano now. And so you kind of see that, one of the strategies is, if you don't have labor, then if companies are going to have to move their manufacturing and so on to areas that do have labor. And that conceivably could have some impacts in terms of our economic growth in Texas. But again, it's a long way off, and there's a lot of things that would need to happen before we actually got there. But that, again, that's the initial concern of declining birth rates is a potential impact on contracting of institutions that serve young people, and then also the potential contracting of the labor force eventually.
So with the growing population in Texas, I have said it often, it kind of seems like like water, certainly energy has been a focus, having enough electricity and stuff like that. Before the 89th Texas legislature, there was talks about AI data centers and AI taking up, increasing the future demand of energy exponentially more than what we anticipated. But also water has become a big issue. And I think even the AI and the data centers need a lot of water.
Yeah.
And so, I'm curious, in your perspective, how all of this is going to affect those sort of key infrastructure components of the Texas economy and Texas way of life, energy and water. Are we able to keep up with that? lawmakers sufficiently focused on it? Are there things that they need to prepare for? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, clearly water is a significant issue, and as you noted, energy has been. I mean, again, looking at it this last session, I mean, there was pretty significant focus on water
Yeah.
and a lot of resources put into water, planning for a future for it. So I actually, I think probably before the session, I was feeling a little pessimistic. Now I'm feeling a little more optimistic.
That's good.
Or before the first session, not the current one.
Sure.
But so certainly, I think Texas has taken a pretty bold step in terms of recognizing and trying to put resources into, and the Water Development Board has plans for projects that kind of will help stabilize and ensure water security. But again, that doesn't mean it's not an issue, and infrastructure takes a long time. So it's kind of like the projects that they're going to be developing aren't going to happen overnight. And so conceivably, we'll have some stress on water availability before things get stabilized, and I'm anticipating that they will. Because again, water is one of those things that certainly we need. As humans kind of living in our houses, but as you noted, a lot of industry is like, if we don't have an adequate water supply, they're not going to come here and they're not going to stay here.
Yeah.
And some of the industries like data centers and so on, they're not going to come and put a place that doesn't have an adequate supply of water there. I mean, so
Yeah.
that's definitely, and power. I mean, those are the two things that they're definitely looking for sure.
Yeah. And it's not so much that they want water for their, I don't know, their data center water fountain. They need water to actually perform their business to, keep
right, to cool
their
computers and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are the effects of urbanization in Texas with the different resources? I mean, there's a big push across the state, certainly here in Austin, to really densify things. It's couched in the idea that it'll make housing cheaper, and true or not true, there's a lot of people that are moving to urban areas, moving to the cities out of rural areas. How does that affect the infrastructure? How does it affect the resource policy?
Yeah, so I mean, so certainly you'll see, as you noted earlier, Texas is growing more than any other state, and a lot of that is as a function of migration. This last year, more than half of our population change was from net in migration, and so those people. And then the other component, so there are people coming into the state from other states and other countries. And then, as you noted earlier, or just a second ago, that there's people who are moving from rural places into urbanized areas. And so that does create, if you're, when I talk to like chambers of commerce and kind of local entities that are growing significantly, I'm kind of like, if you look at the proportion of your growth that's from migration, it's going to tell you a lot about the stress that you're going to be under. So if you're growing from like 80% of your growth is from migration and you're growing a lot, every one of those people that moves here needs a new housing unit. Well, every household, because sometimes there'll be 2 or 3 people in the same housing unit, but you need a housing unit. And if somebody's moving here, they're probably coming with a car or two, and that car or two is going to be on the road. Okay, so if you need the housing unit, then you also need water for the housing unit. You need power for the housing unit. You need internet. So that all of that stuff, and then if people are moving here, they may bring kids with them. So if you look at the places that are growing really fast, their schools are growing. I mean, so I was talking earlier in some of the urban core areas that aren't growing so fast. Schools are consolidating, and they don't have enough students to fill the schools that they have. You go to these places that are growing fast, they can't build schools fast enough. So the growth isn't even. And so the demand for infrastructure isn't even as well. And again, as I mentioned earlier about water, building highways is another thing that takes a long time.
Yeah.
So if you can anticipate where the growth is going to be and try to get ahead of it, if possible, and roads, it's really hard. If the people aren't there and you build a road, it's like hard to get, or I should say, try to build a road. It's hard to get people to convince that there are going to be people there
Yeah.
sometime. And yeah, we need to invest in a road right now because in 5 years there's going to be a lot of people here. So essentially, the infrastructure tends to come after the demand is there, and that then creates, some impact um, on quality of life. And I know, Austin, when they do I-35 through Austin, that's just not going to be pretty. I kind of like, so it's already not pretty. But it's just like, think about what it's going to look like, when I-35 has all kinds of detours and stuff around it through downtown Austin. It's going to be, the quality of life is definitely going to be impacted for those people that have to deal with that.
Yeah. On I hadn't planned on asking you this, but you're a demographer. So, and I've thought about this several times over the past, I don't know, few years since the housing debate and housing prices and everything like that came up. I wonder if you have any thoughts on this. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why there's housing shortages and everything like that. People could point to migration, immigration, migration, all sorts of reasons. But I think there's also a component of divorce in there where, mom and dad were living together with, Bobby and Sue, and then mom and dad get divorced when there was one household, now there's two. And that takes up an extra house, that takes an extra house off the market or apartment or whatever. Is there any study that you've seen or that you've done that looks at the effects of of divorce on housing?
Not that I've seen, and you just give me a great idea. So I was just saying at the beginning, it's like I'm looking for a research project, and it would be one because it actually is an interesting question because I mean, certainly divorce rates have they don't vary dramatically over time, but they kind of increase slowly and decrease slowly and so on. So it'd be kind of interesting to look at that and see if there is an association. And as you noted, I mean, you would expect there to be one
Yeah.
in terms of housing demand. So, if you have an area that with increasing divorce rates, then you would expect, that essentially is kind of somewhat the equivalent of having migration come in because essentially you're splitting a household and needing additional housing.
Yeah, and I mean it's also, digging deeper into that, oftentimes in divorce decrees there's geographic restrictions about where the parents can live. So, whether it's a county or even a neighborhood or, a certain number of county area or something like that, how that affects the housing market depending on, I mean, it's just interesting, and I've never heard anybody really discuss it. So I'm glad that I've provided a new idea for you. That's awesome. That's very cool.
Yeah, thanks.
So, talking about about immigration and migration, I know that there's big effects or big policy moves on the national and state level to reduce illegal immigration, and of course, that is probably having, maybe not. Of course, I shouldn't say that. Because I don't know it for sure. That could be having a chilling effect on legal migration as well. How does that affect the economy and the infrastructure and demographics of Texas, if there is that chilling effect? If there is a lot of deportations or self-deportations or immigration, that whole picture changes.
Yeah, I mean, so certainly, I mean, Texas has been a big net receiver of illegal unauthorized immigration. And I think, I don't know what the estimate is right now, but there wasn't like an estimated 1.6 or 1.7 million unauthorized immigrants in Texas.
Yeah.
And the Pew Research Center had done an estimate, I think, and I think and this was older, had estimated something like 8 or 9% of Texas's labor force were illegal immigrants. And so that's that's not an insignificant thing given how big our economy is and how if we were to lose 8 or 9% of our labor force, and that 8 or 9% of our labor force is also largely in certain sectors that are relatively difficult to fill, meaning mainly construction and hospitality. I think those are kind of the service industry. Those are the areas where I think there's I think there are higher concentrations of illegal immigrants working in those industries. And so and you've already seen, I think if you follow the news, industry being concerned. Agriculture, the other one's agriculture.
Yeah.
Agriculture is very concerned about, what's happening in terms of, if they have a field of crops and all of a sudden they don't have somebody to harvest it, that's going to cost that farmer a lot of money. If they somehow lose a crop in the field because they don't have the labor to harvest it. And so I think, certainly there are some challenges there. So Texas has some of our growth has been occurring from that. I think recently the Census Bureau, so this last year of population estimates the Census Bureau put out, all of a sudden unauthorized immigration popped up really high. Or I shouldn't say unauthorized, what they refer to as immigration. And essentially they've shifted their methodology as a function of receiving data from Homeland Security, because one of the things that our office has asked questions to the Census Bureau about is, well, we're following the news and it says there's all these people crossing the border and surrendering as refugees, but we're not seeing them in the data. I mean, so we weren't really seeing, from reports that we would see about the flow of migrants over the border, and then, what we would expect to see in their estimates. And so they changed that. So that resulted in there being a rather significant jump in the unauthorized, in the immigrant population. They referred to them as humanitarian immigrants, meaning that they're people coming in and seeking refugee status. So that now is showed up in Texas's data. And it really resulted in a significant increase in immigration being a component of our population change. I'm expecting that to stop this coming year, because essentially unauthorized immigration has pretty much come to a standstill.
Yeah.
And so we're not really seeing, I mean, there's a little bit of it, but not very much at all.
Yeah.
And certainly the refugee flow has pretty much come to a standstill. So I would expect we're likely to see, it's not going to be a decline, but certainly our growth is likely to slow some here in the coming year as a function of that, largely because of the humanitarian immigrants, the people seeking refugee status. I probably got off on a tangent here.
You're good.
You were steering me somewhere, and then I kind of started talking about something.
No, I'm not necessarily steering you one direction or another. I'm just here to pick your brain. I'm excited to be talking to you, of course.
Okay.
It's always really cool to talk to people like you that have studied something like this, something sort of unique and maybe a little bit niche, and just know so much about it. So, I'm not steering you in a direction. I'm loving it.
Okay. All right.
So, before I want to talk to you about this redistricting efforts in just a moment, but I'm curious, and that this question doesn't relate to redistricting. Do you make policy recommendations at all? No? Okay. My question was going to be, are there certain policy directions that you hope that the Texas legislature will take in, say, the next legislative session or subsequent legislative sessions to address some of the growing infrastructure concerns due to population growth, or birth rate decline, or any of the other number of
I mean, so I said no, but that said, I mean, I
Sure.
do talk about, and that's one of if you look at the legislation that creates the Office of the State Demographer, I mean, it's in more of an advisory capacity. So it's like, we're growing really fast and water seems to be a problem.
Yeah.
So population growth and water are the two things that those should kind of go together. We should have an adequate water supply. Same thing. I mean, so essentially, while I'm not making a recommendation for what to do about it, it's like, okay, we have population growing and population needs water. population growing, population needs transportation. I mean, so we draw connections that help policymakers, which I don't consider myself to be a policymaker,
Sure.
but we advise policymakers and help them make data informed decisions. That's kind of really what our focus is.
Yeah, that makes sense. Not nonpartisan, just purely here's the data, do your best.
Right. And again, that in relationship to things that they're making policy about.
Sure.
So there's population change, and then you're making policy about water. Here's how population figures into that.
Yeah, of course. So let's talk about this current redistricting effort underway, let's call it. If I'm not mistaken, I think you testified in the last redistricting effort.
After, I guess it was in 2021, or maybe it was 2022, that they
I think
were
it was 21,
doing,
yeah.
Yeah, so we testified at most of the hearings that were being held.
Yeah.
And those were all because of COVID. Those, I think almost all of them were being held using Zoom or some kind of remote.
And here we are using Zoom again. It just doesn't go away.
Yeah.
No. This redistricting effort is underway. Obviously, Republicans are pushing to redraw the congressional maps, and Democrats oppose it. Don't really care about the politics of it, but there's growth in urban areas and suburban areas. Maybe rural areas are declining a little bit. Is there how do they achieve fairness and accuracy in the district boundaries? How is this done?
Well, there's essentially, you look at the total population, and so the current redistricting effort is using the 2020 census data. So essentially, they're going back and fixing what they consider to be problematic, and that's, I think, the justification for the redistricting in the middle of the decade.
Yeah,
and so essentially, there's you take the total population and you divide it by the number of districts, and that tells you what the ideal size is of a congressional district. I think it's 760 something thousand. I can't remember the exact.
That's about right. Yeah,
something about that from the 2020 census, and the 2020 census or the Census Bureau releases a file. I can't remember the name of it, but we refer to it as the redistricting file, and it provides a lot of geographic detail. So that's the data that are used for redistricting. And now it used to be a lot more difficult, but now with the geographic software that we have, it's pretty easy to, essentially program it to kind of draw you boundaries based on certain criteria. And one of those would be that the population within the boundary is close to that number, the 760,000 kind of, there's a plus or minus, I think it's like
sure.
5% or something like that. And so that's the essentially the methodology that is being used is GIS software that, but then they can also put other criteria into the modeling process as well. The people that are drawing districts, we don't do that, so that's not something that our office does. There are professional organizations that are consulting, and then in Texas we have the Texas Legislative Council, and that's the unit within government that does the redistricting for the House and the Senate. So they actually do the work. That said, there are consultants, I think, I'm sure there are consultants outside of government that are working with legislators to kind of make suggestions for maps and so on. And those consultants are using these kinds of software as well. Yeah,
you mentioned that one of the reasons they cite, whatever not saying this is the only reason or the sole reason or anything like that, one of the reasons they cite is issues with the 2020 census. Are there issues with the 2020 census?
I'm not for redistricting. Yeah, well, the 2020 census had a lot of problems with it. It was largely most of it had to do with COVID.
Sure.
and Texas had an undercount. But that said, we still have to use the data that came out for redistricting. So we
Yeah.
have to use the public law, I think it's saying 97, PL 97 file that came out. That's that's what's required to be used for drawing U.S. congressional seats. So that's what is being used, but then that doesn't mean you can't supplement those data with other data, and that's essentially what I think a lot of the consultants are doing. Is they'll have like voting data, and they'll have other kinds of data that they're able to incorporate into how they're drawing the boundaries that they're suggesting.
Yeah, they'll plug it in however they need to, for sure. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me about all of this. It's truly a pleasure. I really love talking about it. Dr. Lloyd Potter, current Texas State demographer and director and professor of demography at the University of Texas San Antonio. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention before we sign off? I don't know, like your opinion as a demographer about the future of Texas 2030, 2040, where we're going. Is it a good or highlights? Do we have things that we need to worry about?
Well, I mean, the thing to worry about is our growth and managing it, I think. So because again, as I say, it's like growth is good, but if you grow too fast, then it gets to be impacts quality of life. So
Yeah.
I think managing that and kind of and I think our legislature is doing pretty good. And if you look at county judges and so on that are kind of responsible for and very frequently mayors are kind of aware of how fast they're growing, and they're kind of doing everything they can to try to catch up. But again, trying to anticipate it and try to get ahead of the infrastructure demand is, I think, the best strategy to ensure that we continue to have high quality of life in the state.
Yeah, that's the goal. Well,
Yes.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. Do you have social media or website or anything else that you wanted to pop in?
Yes, we do. Yes, we have our website is texasdemographics.gov. And if you go there, then you can get all of our social media. I mean, it's kind of like you'll be right on our homepage, and you can find everything. And there are ways to connect to everything that we distribute.
Perfect. We'll put the link down there in the description below. Dr. Potter, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Okay, thank you.